Get Radio's Business Brunch with Ben and Mike. Sponsored by We Do HR Support. Leave your HR to the experts so you can focus on what you do best.
Good morning, this is Get Radio and welcome to the Business Brunch with Ben and Mike. My name's Ben Thompson, owner of Thompson & Terry Recruitment and indeed the Oxford Business Community Network.
And that's good morning from him and also a good morning from me, Mike Foster, the entrepreneur's mentor. Now, I can't believe it's Sunday again. What a busy week it's been. And I've had so many plates spinning and many things coming in from left field, impacting on my days, distracting me, annoying me, frustrating me, breaking away from what I want to focus on. But I guess that's very relevant to the theme of today's roundtable conversation. As you know, as the listeners, our Business Brunch is Oxfordshire's business radio show, and we introduce you to local trusted experts whilst also discussing topical issues that you, the listeners, tell us is impacting on local businesses. And for today's show, we look forward to welcoming two guests. That's Lisa Lloyd of It's Time for Change and Dave Greenaway of Life in Business. Now, Ben, in my usual manner, our question for you is, do business owners have to be resilient?
Oh, you like the big questions, don't you, Mike? And that is a very good question. And I think the only way to answer that would be to put it forward to our two experts. We're going to be discussing their expertise in this area. We're going to be talking about some general business, and I'm sure we're going to have lots of practical top tips for you, the listeners, that you can impact in your own lives and indeed your businesses. This is the Business Brunch with Ben and Mike. We'll be welcoming our guests after this. Welcome back to the Business Brunch with Ben and Mike on Get Radio. Today we're going to be talking about all things resilience, and really delighted to be joined by two experts locally. So we have Lisa Lloyd of It's Time for Change and Dave Greenaway of Life in Business. So let's start with Lisa. Lisa, thanks for joining us. Please tell the listeners a little bit about you and indeed your business.
Thank you for having me. So I help organisations become places where people are happy, want to work, where employees are able to thrive and perform at their best. And as a psychologist and psychotherapist, I go about that a slightly different way in terms of really unpicking what's going on for people and organisations to avoid the quick fixes that come along and the tick boxes. So it's kind of getting beneath the surface. My mantra is really simple. We get people right, and then we get business right. So I might work with leadership, culture, mental well-being, helping people create psychological safety in their workplace. So kind of creating, that feeling when you go to work and you love who you're working with, you get your place, you're valued, you're contributing to something significant, why you're doing stuff. It's kind of helping that become real in organisations.
Absolutely. And look forward to hearing more about that. But before we do, let's go to David Greenaway. David, tell the listeners all about you and indeed your business.
Hi, Ben. Thanks ever so much for having me. Yeah, I'm Dave Greenaway from Life in Business, and we're an organisation that do a lot of one-to-one coaching and workshops. We have some online courses, which I'm in the process of filming and shooting, ready for launching this year. So it's so exciting. But what we do is we do the very practical, pragmatic part of business coaching. But through all my years of being in this sector, I really noticed that I spent more time talking about the person on their limiting beliefs, on their fears, and all their challenges that we all suffer from most of the time. So my coaching, the work there has actually really morphed quite a lot. So I spend a lot of time with people, just helping them overcome themselves, to awaken to themselves and have a better experience of business. I've not been one for following the grain of business. I'm not a big fan of, people will shudder, but of goals, of hustle, of lots of lists. I have a very different approach to business. And I just like sharing that other view. I think, not saying I'm right and everyone else is wrong, it's just another way. So that's what we do in Life in Business. We just kind of wake people up and show them another way.
Amazing. No, thanks so much for the intro. I'm now going to ask one of the two most difficult questions this morning based on past shows. And that question is for Lisa. So Lisa, you picked a song for our listeners. What is your song choice and why have you picked it?
Okay, so I've chosen the Fight song. And the reason I've chosen that is because I like, when you listen to the lyrics, there's a sense of being able to take control of your mindset, so you know that you can create change for yourself. And I like the fact that Rachel talks about a boat, a small boat, or lighting a small fire with a match, and actually big things happen. It's that sense of it's the ripple effect. So you only have to change one small thing, and then big things can happen off the back of that. So when you're determined to succeed, just start with something really small, and then just watch what materializes.
This is the Business Brunch with Ben and Mike on Get Radio. Before that song, chosen by Lisa, and I hope, like me, you listened intensely to the lyrics that were introduced by Lisa to understand why she chose it. And as I said earlier, you'll know that our show aims to share the knowledge, experience and the expertise of our guests whilst we're discussing topical issues that impact local businesses. And today we're going to be talking about resilience for business owners with both Lisa Lloyd and Dave Greenaway. So just to kick off then our discussion, Lisa, can I come to you first with that question that I asked Ben? Do business owners have to be resilient? And I guess tag on to that, what is resilience?
It's a good question. I think business owners need to be resilient because with the pace of change and quite what's going on in the world at all times, people can expect change to happen. That's the one thing we're certain about. People have to be able to bounce back. And when we talk about, there's a lot of talk about bouncing back, particularly since the pandemic. And I will often challenge people in terms of what their understanding is around bouncing back. So is it about expecting to go back to where we were? Or is it about the fact that when something tricky happens, there's a challenge, we can work out how to navigate it. And perhaps we dip a little bit in our sense of well-being or in a sense of performance, but we learn from it and then we might bounce onto a new track. So it's about where we go next. So rather than expecting to go back, actually learning every time something happens, every time you come across something that feels a little bit challenging, thinking what was difficult about it? What did I do well that really helped me get through? What were the stumbling blocks? And learning. And if you learn each time, then you're never going to go back to where you were. You're always going to jump onto a slightly different path. You might be slightly on the same path, but further ahead. So it's just each time there's a challenge, clarifying where it is you're trying to get to, understanding that will probably change, and how you're getting there. That journey might look, you might be on a different path or with a different bag, different people in your car. You know, it's that sense of there's constant change as you go along that. But then you need to be resilient in terms of being able to cope with those challenges. However, not too resilient, because I know some people will have an illusion that if they are in a leadership role, that they need to be seen to be completely together, completely on it. They know exactly what's happening. They've got it all mapped out. They know how to respond. And I don't think that's very realistic. And I think that sets quite a dangerous expectation for everyone else around them also, to be seen to hold it all together all the time and to have a sense of certainty. So it's accepting there are challenges, knowing how to navigate them, but at the same time being able to say, this is tricky. I might not know where I'm going at the moment, or I might not know how to take the next step forward. This is what I'm doing about it. And just being quite open about that. So rather than trying to be too in control.
No, what a great way to start the round table. Dave, one of the things you said in your introduction that I really, really loved, what was around the goal piece, because I think society teaches us that we should be pushing, we should be driving revenues, we should be getting better, we should be doing all of those things. And I think there's quite a big piece around kind of unhappiness and mental health and pressure at the moment. Do you think that kind of society piece in terms of pushing towards goals could be a cause for that?
Yeah, I do. I have to say, but I think there's a place for it. Now, when I say I hate goals, I say it with a tongue-in-cheek mentality, because I know we kind of have to have some element of a direction to point at. When I prefer to view it as sort of setting a compass, setting off in a direction that might feel exciting and a bit exhilarating to me, new, out of my comfort zone, but I'm not so tied to the end result. I'm more interested in the here and now. So I think where it might get a problem for habitual goal setters is when their happiness is tied to the future, where there always looks better than here, you know. And I think that can be a real problem for people, for their mental health, for their well-being, because if a part of life is to experience some sort of happiness and contentment and joy as we go on this ride in the business context, if there was always better than here, then you're never going to experience that. And in my experience, when I've watched other people do it, is they reach that goal, and typically they kind of get there with not much celebration. They have this idea that they just should have got there. They kind of expected it. So they get there and go, what do I do now? Well, set more goals then. And then they keep raising the bar. And so that's where my situation, not problem, I think that's too strong, but I don't like using them. And I'm always very careful here, Ben, because I never think I'm right and everyone else is wrong. It's just another way. It's just the way I go about things. And I've found that there's a group of people who are similar to me who would like to know, hey, I hate goals, Dave. What's the alternative? Well, we can do this instead. So I think that it has a big part to play with mental health. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I add to that as well? I think also when people are experiencing something that's quite challenging, it's very tempting for people to jump in and say, right, how are we going to fix this and how are we going to help you move forward, without acknowledging that sometimes we just need to have a bit of space to go, it feels really tough. Like where I am, I want to feel a bit miserable for a time, because actually that's just a normal emotional reaction to what's going on. And I think having a sense of self-compassion is really important, rather than putting pressure on ourselves with goals to fast forward and to make things better, or make things, for the constant striving for things to be better than they are right now. I think it just puts so much pressure on ourselves, and it doesn't create, or doesn't allow the space for us just to sit with what we're experiencing as a normal response, acknowledging that there will be a sense of moving, you need to move forward, but we don't have to do it at such a fast pace that we're not really coming to terms and accepting and acknowledging normal responses to whatever's going on in the world.
And I see it myself. I totally resonate. And some of the listeners will know that I love my goals. I'm a massive goal planner. I've got an effective goal planning sequence, but I've even have to soften my language over the last probably 6 months, because I think goals and business growth are starting to be dirty words for people, whereby it's just putting too much pressure after the pandemic on people. So, I can certainly resonate with what you guys are talking about. Lisa, I want to touch on one of the things you talked about bouncing back, because obviously if we want change in the business, and I love what you said about learning, because every outcome, I believe, brings us a learn that we have to take forward. But this bouncing back bit, and it's probably linked into your psychology, is that where are they bouncing back to? Are they bouncing back to their comfort zone, where they saw themselves in the pre-moment, or where are they bouncing back to?
Probably depends on the kind of person you are. So there'll be people who will bounce back to what's safe and familiar and comfortable, and that for some people is about not taking any risks. It's about just doing what I know will work, and that's definitely in their comfort zone. Some people will bounce back in terms of themselves. So I'm getting back my sense of energy, my sense of focus, my sense of where I want to go. And that might be a slightly different course, that might be heading towards a different goal, but I got myself back. And I think so for different people, it means different things. I think the term bounce back has been used such a lot since the pandemic. And which is why one of my things is always, as a psychologist, is always unpicking what people mean by terminology. When someone says bounce back, or uses a phrase, actually what do you mean by that, and making sure that there's clarity around, is it you want to get back to how your zest for life and your ability to feel like you're thriving, or rather than just sort of surviving and feeling overwhelmed, or do you want to get back to how you used to do something or used to live, or actually do you want to leave that behind because you realize it doesn't suit you anymore, it doesn't serve you anymore, you want to do something different. So I think it very much depends on the individual, their mindset, what their experience is, what they want to get out of life.
Sometimes I see that as well, as for me, I've experienced sort of bouncing forward as a way that something can happen, and actually the back sort of is a connotation that we're going backwards somehow, but you can actually bounce forward. Something difficult, challenging can happen, and you can actually take you off on a whole new path, but you don't know that that's the right path until you've got the gift of hindsight. So yeah, I often think about it in that similar way, that it depends on the individual, doesn't it?
And also I think on their organisation they're part of.
Yeah.
And that's become something that's, as people, this all hinges around self-awareness. And so you might become aware as an individual that you want to get back to where the kind of person you were. And actually, I've just been really ground down in my job, or my values aren't aligned with this organisation anymore. So I'm not sure this is the right place for me to be. So it's that constant sort of self-checking and working out, does this feel right for me? And it's not necessarily just an individual place. It might be, it's how I feel, but I operate within a context, within a wider system, which is my family, but the workplace is an obvious place that a lot of people are questioning in terms of their resilience.
No, really interesting point. I didn't need much tempting when you use the word workplace to talk about the world of recruitment. One of the things I find quite interesting is that through my recruitment business, the percentage of employers who use the trait resilience under almost every job description is huge. What would be your advice to employers in terms of recruiting for resilience? And that could be a question for both of you.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a trait that we can't really identify in an interview process, particularly. It's not, you can't really identify as a tangible thing that we have or a skill necessarily to have. I believe that resilience is baked into our system. We're hardwired with it. We have been for all of human history. It's just now and again we have to use it in different quantities and draw upon that innate resource of resilience in different ways. I think it's resilient that most people get up every day and go off and do their work and feed their families. That seems pretty darn resilient to me, as much as people experience extreme resilient factors like, the earthquakes and awful things that go on in the globe. So as far as recruitment goes, it kind of, I don't know, it may sound daft, it almost seems a bit of a nonsensical question. It's like, well, you can't really ask someone if they've got something that they definitely have got, but to what degree? That seems very strange to me to ask someone about that. I don't know. What do you think, Lise?
Well, for me, it comes back to that level of self-awareness and actually just asking people, finding out for people how much they prioritise things, basic things like self-care. So knowing that people are more resilient if they look after themselves, and knowing what that looks like, that'll be different for each individual. But if they prioritise, if they know what their early warning signs are that they're beginning to struggle, and knowing that they then have a plan of what to do around that, then you know that this individual you're looking to recruit is going to be taking responsibility for themselves and will notice when things aren't okay. And then hopefully, depending on the organisation, will be able to speak up and say, actually, I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed with this right now, a bit stressed with that right now, a bit anxious about this, or this has happened and I don't feel great about it. Having the ability to be able to communicate that and then know what I can do about it. So that's not saying I'm putting all the onus on the individual to sort out everything, because it's obviously got to be part of a bigger picture. But if an individual is self-aware and has some strategies in place, then that would be helpful, rather than just someone saying, well, I'll just keep going and I'll just keep pushing through. And that would ring alarm bells for me.
This is an interesting point, isn't it? I guess in interview questions, we're asking people to give us examples and situations, and quite often people can't see it themselves. With my own clients, I sit there with awe sometimes about how resilient they've been, and they don't think they've been resilient. They just think they're just getting through the day and all that sort of thing. Dave, I wanted to talk about something you mentioned in your intro about how you work with the person and about their limiting beliefs, because I'm big on limiting beliefs. So how does limiting beliefs impact their ability to deal with resilience or be resilient?
I think it impacts it greatly, because there's absolute truth in we are what we think, and if we were to take that in its most simplest model, if somebody thinks that they're not resilient, then they're not going to have the thoughts and feelings around being particularly resilient. So I think for the way that I coach through limiting beliefs, it's helping people just unlock that and showing them that they don't necessarily need to believe everything that they think. And as I sort of mentioned a little earlier, is that this resilience in this context is baked in. It is, we all have it. It is there for us all. We just need to know when to draw on it or not. And I think, as you quite rightly say, Mike, there's resilience all day, every day, and we tend to see it in others, not in ourselves. And I think that's very true. But the limiting beliefs part is huge, as you'll well know. I mean, it catches us all out, no matter whether we're the people like us talking about it all day, every day, still suffer from it, still have my coaches work with me on it all of the time, and they rear their head out of nowhere sometimes. But I think it's important that people can, to Lisa's point, have that awareness to know that when things are beginning to get them stuck, and if it is a difficult thought that's getting them stuck, because there's some very common ones, as we're all aware of, I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve wealth, and all the usual stuff that we struggle with, that they have the awareness to then look for the help, to ask for the help from you, Mike, from Lisa, from whoever, and knowing. I think that's actually, in a way, that is the resilience piece, exactly what Lisa's been saying, is being able to open up and say, hey, do you know what? I don't know how to get beyond this. I need some help.
No, great advice there, Dave. I'm going to stay with you because, as with Lisa, you've not got off. You need to pick a song for our listeners as well. So what is your song choice and why have you picked it?
I'm picking Katy Perry, the Firework. I'm a Firework, only purely because I asked my daughter, I've got to pick a song, and that's what she said I should pick.
Welcome back to the Business Brunch with Ben and Mike on Get Radio. Before that song, chosen by Dave, we were speaking with Lisa and Dave about their vast experience around the umbrella of resilience, which certainly, as business leaders, impacts us all. So Lisa, I'm just going to come across to you. I understand that you wanted to build on Dave's point, but I did want to add a secondary thing to you, if that's okay, which is just around what should we do as business leaders if we're struggling? What would be your advice?
Firstly, is actually just to tell someone you're struggling. And the number of business leaders I work with who don't feel they are part of a support network, whether that's with their own leadership team, whether that's with other organizations, other businesses, they feel that they feel huge pressure on their shoulders to get everything right and to make the right choices all the time. So if you feel that you're struggling, just to be able to be open about that. As soon as we're open about that and we're being authentic, it can be a huge sense of relief, particularly if you're surrounding yourself with the right people who will have a sense of empathy for you, will look to support you rather than judge you. And that's when, earlier when I was introducing what I do, talking about psychological safety. If you're in an environment where it's okay to say, actually, I'm struggling, regardless of who you are in an organization, and you can say that to the right person, then you immediately open up, in terms of your limiting beliefs and just thinking this is how it is, or I'm feeling stuck. Other people can help you look at what the evidence is. They can help you reframe what your sense of reality is. They can start to just remind you about some of the stuff that actually you probably know you've just forgotten. Just being able to surround yourself with people who can just remind you about stuff like emotional overwhelm. I talk a lot about sort of the neuroscience in terms of emotional arousal and so on. And actually, for me, when I talk with business leaders, I'm just normalizing a lot of what they're experiencing, because again, there's that sense of shame or embarrassment that I don't feel I can cope, I'm not resilient enough. And it's like, actually, your brain's responding in entirely the right way to what's going on right now. You have a choice of what you do with that. And it comes then to the sense of you're not determined. What happens is not shaped entirely by your beliefs. You have to listen to what that internal narrative is saying and then choose whether you want to listen to it or not. And that's easier when you're talking to other people who can help you do that reframing or look at the evidence going on for you.
And Dave, one of the words, obviously, from the Oxford Dictionary that's come to the fore is the word resilience, isn't it? In terms of particularly from the pandemic. And Lisa talked about when she was introducing herself about the pace of change. So do you think it's the pace of change as a result of the pandemic that's impacted on people having to be more resilient, and perhaps it's been identified in the past, and give us perhaps some examples from your conversations that you've been having about such change?
Yeah, it's undeniable, isn't it, that the pandemic took us ahead very quickly and changed how we operate. I think that pace of change, Mike, it absolutely has been accelerated coming out of the pandemic. And from a point of view of resilience, the people I speak to, I think they've been a lot more resilient than they think they have been. I think that they've actually demonstrated that more and more, because when we were in the pandemic, we shifted to online so quickly. We shifted to being at home with our families actually really quickly, and all learned to cope and manage. And coming out of it, have all sort of almost just taken it in our stride. There's this air of we've just walked through this, once in a lifetime challenge. It's hard to evidence. I really think it's very hard to evidence, and you can only do it with hindsight. And I don't think people tend to look back enough and actually just give themselves a little pat on the back once in a while on how far they've come, how resilient they've been in the face of many adversities. I mean, we take in the cost of living, we take in the churn of jobs. You all know, Ben, jobs are churning over like mad at the moment. And people are wonderful. I mean, what a wonderful gift to have innately in every single one of us. I just feel that is an absolute gift. Like, couldn't be any better, and we need it. That's why it's there. It's kind of...
Do you think it's part of the entrepreneur in business owners, whereby they don't accept when they've got to a certain point, they've just got to go again?
Definitely. Yeah, I think absolutely. I think we're not so good. Not that I'm putting myself in the bracket as an entrepreneur, but I don't think typically they're as good as noticing their own warning signs. I think, to the point of what Lisa was saying, that, the dials and a dashboard in a car, when we start to run out of fuel, or we're revving too high, or oil light comes on, engine mount, we kind of have these signals in life, don't we? And I think very driven people tend not to take attention to them up until it stops them in their tracks, and up until they hit their point of no return. A failed engine, car.
I think also is that people comparing themselves to other people a lot. So, when I was going back a number of years, and I was trying to work out what it was I was doing, because I was doing a lot of stuff and going off in all different directions. And it's that sense of I'd constantly be looking out at what other people are doing and assuming that they're doing better for whatever reason, or whatever measures. And it's almost like it's just me sitting here doing my thing, but I'm not kind of a serious business owner. I remember having this conversation with Dave going, it's just me doing my thing. But actually, I think, it's looking at what's important to you. And I think that's also contributed to the pace of change, in terms of people tuning in much more to what their values are about. And, thinking, how I'm working, how I'm thinking about life, trying to, whether it's comparing myself to other people or trying to do the right thing by my team or whatever it is, am I still living the life that actually I want to live? Am I still showing up in the way that I want to show up? Or do I realize that I'm almost cutting myself off from people, put my head down because I've got so much work to do, or I'm being snappy because I just feel overwhelmed, or, just going back and checking in? I think that's also contributed to the pace of change, because people are realizing that maybe they've got into ways of living that don't feel right anymore, and it's not, and that's then challenges your sense of resilience, because if you're not living day to day what in a way that feels authentic and meets your values and gives you a sense of meaning and purpose, and is kind of aligned to just how you want to be on a day-to-day basis, it's going to feel uncomfortable, and that really challenges our resilience.
Thank you for your thoughts so far. We'll continue the conversation after this. Welcome back to the Business Brunch with Ben and Mike on Get Radio. Today, I'm really, really delighted to be joined by two experts all around the topic of resilience, which, as I've said a couple of times now, is a topic that really, really does impact us all. Dave, I just want to bring the conversation across to you and really focus on the people around us. So what can we do to help our business friends, our colleagues, our staff, the people that are working in our business, to almost put that arm around them and help them when they are struggling?
It's creating a safe place, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit cliche, but it's showing them that if they do open up to want to talk to you, if you're a business leader or colleague, that they're not going to fall foul of being judged or any sort of derogatory type of comments or behaviours from somebody else. And exactly as Lisa said earlier, it's all about that they can have the confidence within themselves, the courage, should I say, to talk about something that is really troubling them. And I think leaders are getting better. I have to say, I think we need to give credit where it's due. I see more and more that CEOs, big business leaders, certainly some that I know, are turning much more inward facing to their team, with the idea that the CEO works for the team, not the other way around, and it's their role to foster that culture, to make it as strong and as safe as it can possibly be from all angles. And that's encouraging. And I think, when mental health is at the top of the agenda a lot, that is extremely encouraging. And I think, you should always be brave enough, have enough courage to tackle these things, because, unfortunately, in my experience, these things don't kind of go away on their own. They need support. They need help from professionals like Lisa, whoever else. They need that. And that's a good thing. I can't see how that's not a good thing,
I would also, so I was going to add to that in terms of a really simple question to ask companies is why they do what they do. So I was having a conversation with some people recently who were talking about the way their industry operates. And it's like, well, why do you do that like that? You know, why does that function like that? Well, it's just, that's how it's always been. That's traditional. Like, well, is it still fit for purpose? Is the way your processes work, or the way you connect with each other, you know, go back to the basics, go back to the drawing board. Is what you're doing on a day-to-day basis still fit for purpose? And does it still serve you well in terms of your sense of well-being, in terms of performance, in terms of just feeling good about yourself? And actually, a lot of the times people go, well, I don't know, we just inherited this practice. Well, review it. You know, don't take stuff for granted. I think we just take stuff because that's what's always happened, rather than saying, actually, I'm going to look at every aspect of my day or every aspect of my team and think, is that still the best way of doing it? And don't make that decision on your own as a business owner. Make it with your team. So sit down and say, this is how we do this. Does it work? The classic one's team agendas. You know, the number of leaders I've been talking to say, this is how we run our team meetings. It's like, well, does that feel enjoyable for people? Does it feel a useful use of time? And you ask the teams, they're like, no, they're dull. You know, we know we could do half this stuff by email. So in that case, you change your format of those meetings. But you can get some really valuable data just by asking your team, is what we're doing really helping us be who we want to be and feel how we want to be and achieve what we want?
Lisa, I want to expand on something you said earlier about unpicking the language that's used is one of the things that you do within your role, because I think, you know, we just talked about leaders identifying that a member of the team needs support, and quite often we need to look inwards, don't we, at ourselves, and say, okay, well, my resilience tank is actually low, but I might not be using the word resilience. So what sort of language do people tend to use that, you know, when you've been unpicking it in the past, that we need to look out for?
Sometimes it's body language, sometimes, and if it's verbal, it might be anything about they're just struggling with something, just feeling a bit tired, just not sure. I think for people, it's more around seeing, if you see something or hear something different to what you normally experience with that person. So if we'll all use different language, and it's just tuning into and being open to what might they mean by that. So if I'm someone who's always talk about the fact I'm tired because maybe I've got a newborn or whatever, then actually I'm always tired. But if I'm someone who's normally quite energetic and quite positive, and then I'm talking about the fact that I'm just feeling tired, or you know, I just seem a bit flatter, then that's something I would start unpicking a little bit and checking that out. And I think we have to be really mindful of nominalizations. You know, people say, oh, I want to be happy, or you know, I'm feeling stressed. Well, what do you actually mean by that? You know, what does that look like for you? What does that feel like for you? So to unpick those terms, because again, we all use those terms to mean slightly different things. If we talk about stress for me will feel different to stress for you guys. So it's being really clear about that. And I think the other thing I would say is about being really cautious about pattern matching. So when someone else says, I'm stressed, it's very easy for us to go, oh yeah, I'm stressed too, and assuming then I know what it feels like for you, rather than, okay, I hear you're stressed, let me join you where you're standing and kind of experience what does that look like for you. So rather than assuming we know, because we're adding our own meaning to our own experience, so it's kind of checking that out a little bit.
Really good advice. I think one of the traits of an entrepreneur is that they will push themselves too hard at times, and they will take on that ambitious target or goal, as we were talking about earlier, and figure out how to do it afterwards. What would be kind of your advice if an entrepreneur is pushing themselves too hard, but they enjoy pushing themselves too hard? They enjoy working very long hours. They enjoy feeling up against it. They enjoy that challenge. What are some of the techniques that they can apply in that scenario?
So I meet quite a few people like that who are like, oh, I just love this and I thrive on stress and I just love that sense of kind of being on it all the time. And that's great. And I kind of explain that that's really positive right now, but actually, is that sustainable over a period of time? I talk a lot about what goes on in the brain. I will draw very, very bad pictures of what's going on in the brain, and I talk about emotional arousal and so on. If you're, depending on where someone's operating, if they're in a place where they're feeling stretched and they're feeling motivated and so on, so that's really positive. If it tips over into stress, which is different stretch, and it tips over into something that just starts to feel is slightly uncomfortable. I'm pushing myself a little bit too hard. So maybe people are feeding back to me that I'm pushing myself too hard. There's got to be something that will have signaled I'm pushing myself too hard for you to know about it. So it's what's that signal? What someone said or what someone observed of me that shows that I am pushing myself too hard, and unpick that a little bit. And also, just when I explained a bit about emotional arousal in the brain, actually we can only maintain high emotional arousal for a certain amount of time. So by taking breaks doesn't mean you're stepping back and being lazy. It just means you're looking after your brain. I was talking to someone recently who said, I feel guilty if I read a book, I should be doing something more productive. And it's like, I was drawing all these levels of emotional arousal, saying actually, if you just keep pushing, your performance drops. Whereas if you can push yourself and be in your best place, and then you take a break, which is going for a walk or listening to some music or a podcast or whatever it might be, just have that break. It just lets everything kind of calm down a little bit, and then you can go at it again. And then you can be really productive to accompany your sense of excitement and enthusiasm. It's no good just blindly being super excited and determined and motivated, but actually not performing particularly well because your brain hasn't got the tolerance.
Do you know what came up for me as I was thinking about it was, instantly was then, to me, that feels like somebody who might be sacrificing something in their other part of their life and or hiding from something in the other part of their life, where they're throwing themselves so fully into work is to maybe get away from something else that's going on. Now I come from a place of absolute balance, blend, whatever you want to call it, but I think if you throw yourself that far into work, there will be sacrifices in the other side of life, because whatever we put time and attention into tends to grow, and if that's all you're putting into your work, then the other things tend not to grow. And I think, I can understand why people get into that habit and then find it hard to get out of that habit. But I think, as Lisa said, the long-term effect seems quite frightening to me, because, the number in your bank account is not what's going to be the thing you think about when you're taking those last breaths in this little journey called life. It's going to be all the experience, the family, the love, the relationships, all that sort of stuff. That's how I see life. So I'm very aware for myself to really balance that and balance it well, that I almost never feel guilty either way, whether I'm with the family or if I'm at work. And quite often trying to do both at the same time, right? Like a lot of people right now,
I think what you've just said, Dave, really sums up, and I completely agree with everything you've just said, because for me, it's about balancing your emotional needs. And I use an emotional needs audit with people, which is around sense of connection and status and control and so on. And my worry is also about if people are putting everything into one thing, whether it's their job or whatever it is, if that thing goes, they have nothing left. And then that's when there's a real worry in terms of someone's resilience, because they haven't got anything else in their network, in their environment to support them. So it's about making sure that we have, we're connected. We need a sense of belonging in our work, but also outside of work. We need a sense of status in terms of feeling good about who we are in work and out of work. And it's about making sure we've got that balance and we're not putting all our eggs into one basket, because for me, that really rings alarm bells, like you, Dave.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I spend a lot of time working with my clients to work out what they mean by work-life balance. So many people say work-life balance. And I said, okay, well, if I was to give you every weekend and every evening, what would you do with it? And they can't describe that, because they love their business so much that they're quite willing to do things in the evening and the weekends, etc. But we're coming towards the end of our show, and as you probably know from our very first episode of our podcast that's now launched, we love a top tip on this show. And so we're going to come to each of you. So what would be your top tips around resilience, so that we can add that to our data bank and perhaps might write a book on it one day. But Lisa, what would you say is your top tip for someone around resilience?
I would say anticipate uncertainty and change, and that challenges are inevitable and failure is inevitable. So if you expect your road ahead to have some bumps on it, and some of those you might be able to anticipate and work around, and some of them will come out of the blue, you'll have no idea that they're coming. But if you know that there's going to be a sense of it's not going to go according to plan, I might have to throw out the window, or I might have to go and seek advice from other people. If you anticipate that takes the pressure off and it normalizes those challenges and our emotional responses and gives us the strength, I think, to carry on going.
Really good tip. And Dave, what's your top tip to end the show?
I think the top tip on resilience is to trust and deeply know you have it, and you have it in bucketfuls, and you can just rely on it, that it will show up when you need it. It is there for all of us. And I hope people don't have to access it, right? Not too deeply, because that means they're dealing with stuff. But to Lisa's point, life is going to it's a tough game, isn't it? It's a contact sport is the word I'm looking for, this game of business. I think we can handle it. It's there, but knowing when enough is enough and to reach out.
Amazing. Great advice. But that is the end of the show. So thank you so much to our two guests. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us on the Business Brunch with Ben and Mike on Get Radio today. It's been such an insightful show with such practical advice for anyone listening. I think there's certainly a notebook of takeaways. If you are just tuning in, we've had Lisa Lloyd of It's Time for Change and Dave Greenaway of Life in Business. Thank you so much to you both for your time and contribution to our discussion.
You've been listening to the Business Brunch with Ben and Mike here on Get Radio. We're back next Sunday with even more brand new guests. And also, in case you've missed it, this show is now available on a podcast format. So as a reminder, you can catch us as you have today on the radio at 11 o'clock each Sunday, or it'll be in podcast format on all your favourite podcast platforms every Monday. And then don't forget, you can look out for the video format if you like watching via the Get Radio Facebook page every Tuesday. But for now, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you next week.